LinkedIn News.
To be human in a finite life is like being in a little kayak on a rapidly flowing river. All you can do is sort of be there and like react to what happens and trust yourself and have a certain amount of awareness of what's going on. But what we sort of really want is to be like the captain of like one of those super yachts where you just program the route in and you're sitting in a plush swivel stool, looking at the computers and not really doing anything, just letting the journey unfold and thinking about how great it's going to be at your destination. But we're never in the super yacht. We're always in the kayak.
That's bestselling author Oliver Burkeman. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned to hear his fresh perspective on how changing your mindset about your time will make it easier to do what matters. Don't forget to hit that follow button to get new episodes of our show every week. And if you want to hang out with me more, you can find me on socials. Finally, if you like this conversation, I have a favor to ask. Leave us a review wherever you're listening so we can keep bringing you more conversations that you love. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, this is Everyday Better, a show about the tools you need to create positive change in your mindset, your work, and every other area of your life. I'm Leah Smart, LinkedIn senior editor and a certified professional coach. I help people become better versions of themselves one day at a time. And every week, I sit down with a trusted voice so together we can explore how to take small steps toward big changes, the kind we plan for, strive toward, or never saw coming. 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals was an instant New York Times bestseller when the book first came out in 2021. It's all about how we spend our 4,000 weeks on Earth, assuming we live to be about 80 years old. At first glance, you might think it did so well because it seems like a book that's finally showing us how to master our time, how to wrangle it and feel like we're managing it instead of it managing us. But 4,000 Weeks is quite the opposite. The book was written by journalist Oliver Burkeman, who spent years writing a column for The Guardian and researching every productivity hack and strategy he could find. And then, one day, he had an epiphany. He would never get on top of his to-do list. He would never finally feel like he had perfect control of his time. In fact, the only way to feel content with his level of productivity and the time he had was to acknowledge his limitations and stop hitching his sense of self-worth to his ever-changing levels of productivity. And this realization allowed him to finally relax. When Oliver and I sat down together, he had just released his follow-up book, Meditations for Mortals. The book gives practical strategies for dealing with the problems of our very limited time. What you're going to hear in this conversation is some new ways to think about getting your work done. So how to build new habits by doing things daily-ish, which I loved and I use for working out and staying active now. The 3 to 4 hour rule, and what I'm calling the anti-bucket list. This is the argument for not adding to, but taking away from the list of what you most want to accomplish in your hopefully 4,000 weeks. Here's Oliver. You talked about the fact that you were like a productivity geek.
Oh, yeah.
So that was your whole thing. Like, I'm going after ways in which we can become even more productive. And then you finally realize, like, this is actually not leading me anywhere that's going to get me what I want, which is to finally, like all of us, get on top of our time.
Right.
Can you take me back to that kind of park bench moment in Brooklyn where you're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I wrote this column for years for The Guardian newspaper. It wasn't only about time management, but one of the things I got to do was to test out all these different systems and review books in the space and all this. And it was fun, but it was also a little bit maybe enabling of my worst character traits, because you keep thinking like, well, okay, maybe the next one is going to be the sort of silver bullet that enables me to get that feeling of being totally in control, on top of everything, never have to say no to any demand, always get to please everybody, don't need to worry that everyone's mad at me for not doing things. But the great advantage of doing like 100 of them for a column over multiple years is that eventually even someone as dense as me, apparently, comes to understand that maybe the problem here is not that I haven't found the right one yet. Maybe the problem is that there's some problem with this quest to achieve total control over the human condition. And the moment on the park bench that you refer to is just that it was a week that was sort of even more full of deadlines and anxiety inducing than usual, working as a journalist, sitting there on the way to work and just being struck by this thought like, oh, it's impossible. And finding that so liberating, because it's really hard to beat yourself up for doing something that you've realized is literally completely impossible, right? And so I think I'm trying to tell people that all the ways that we're limited in terms of our time and our control over our time are not things we have to spend our lives fighting against. They're actually the sort of the portal, the route to fulfilling and meaningful life. So it's about embracing limitation.
Doesn't that sound like a little scary?
Yeah, or depressing. Those are the two options, right? It's scary or depressing or both. I think it is a little bit scary because it involves facing up to things that we might not want to face up to, about how much time we have, how much control we have over how the day unfolds as well. And it's about like the fact that we're going to die in the end, which nobody really likes to think about. But I think that the scariness that comes with facing up to something that's real is always ultimately empowering and actually sort of calming in a way, because then you're going through your life with less of some sort of big thing that you're trying to avoid not thinking about, which is actually really stressful.
What I love about this book and your way of thinking is this isn't a brand new idea, but it's a different way of looking at something that feels simple and brilliant in a way. You know, so there's this feeling of like, when you say you're sitting on a park bench going, it's impossible, I felt relief just now. It's like, oh, right, it's impossible that my to-do list will get completely done, that my bucket list for the rest of my life will get completely finished, that I'll check off all of these things. But this idea of like this obsession around our time, especially in American culture, is a newer one.
Right. The very idea of having a relationship with time, right? We go through our lives feeling like we have a rather fraught relationship with time, like we're fighting against time, or it's hounding us, or we're trying to get on top of it, like we were talking about. And all of that depends on this really basic notion that there's like you, and then there's time, and you've got to use this time in a sensible way, otherwise you're bad, basically. And I think that there's lots of evidence to suggest that for pre-industrial people, they wouldn't have recognized this separation in the first place. Time is just like the medium in which life unfolds. If you work in a small-scale agricultural setting, you milk the cows when they need milking and you harvest the crops when it's time to harvest them. You don't like line everything up against a schedule and then see if you can force a bit more in. It's just like life unfolds from the rhythms of the natural world that you're in. Once clocks are in widespread use and once the Industrial Revolution comes along, there's this gradual shift into this idea of time as an objective thing, as a resource, as a thing you can manage, as a thing you can sell, right? There's that big shift from selling someone a product that you made to selling some hours of your time and doing a shift in a factory. Owners of factories and mills in the Industrial Revolution want to extract as much value from a given hour of the time that they're buying from their employees. And then somewhat later, you get the move from those same ideas into sort of white-collar executive time management, the idea that not only is it a question of sort of hard taskmasters extracting labor from people they employ, but it's also like trying to get as much value out of oneself.
Human capital.
Right. And trying to sort of hold yourself to these standards and treating your time as a resource that you've got to sort of spend in the right way through the day. And, you know, listen, there's nothing wrong with this intrinsically. The problem is the idea that is ever going to get you to this golden age of being on top of absolutely everything and thus living your life in this sort of constant optimization struggle. And I think that in a way, for a sort of medieval peasant, even though their lives were absolutely terrible in almost every way you can imagine, they wouldn't have had those time problems because they would have felt that they were fully in the moment instead of this thing we do all the time, which is like projecting ahead, trying to figure out if there's enough space before the end of the day to cram another thing in. And that's the source of a lot of our misery, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. And also the belief that there is an arrival, which you talk about a lot. There's a point where I will get there and then everything will fall into place and I'll start living the life that I've always intended to live, which your point is that never comes.
Right. And, you know, I'm always at pains to say, not because I think like life is more mediocre than people want it to be and we should just settle for less, but because we've got a sort of systematically unattainable definition of that arrival point. It's like the point at which I, as a finite human, can handle an infinite amount of tasks or pursue an infinite number of life ambitions or be completely confident about what's coming in the future, even though nobody can ever be completely confident about what's coming in the future. So it's like you're setting up the game to lose it.
Well, so you reminded me of when I was reading the part of the book about settling, where you talk about you said something like, I'm going to give you the best dating advice I can ever give you, which is that you will settle. It's inevitable. It reminded me also of another British author, Alain de Botton, who wrote this really popular article in the New York Times, Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. Yeah. When I saw that headline, I was like, oh my God, this is hilarious and amazing. It's going to freak a lot of people out, especially us Americans. But I think there's something to the idea of settling and anything. How do you explain settling to yourself, and how do you come to peace with the idea that you will settle for something?
I mean, I think it requires a certain definition of settling, as the Alain de Botton piece requires a certain definition of the wrong person.
Right.
Otherwise, I risk sort of deeply insulting my wife or something, right? It's like
we don't want to do that.
It's definitely not about a sort of mediocre standard in your life. And by the way, this applies beyond dating. It's about settling for a job, settling for a place you live, all the rest of it. It's rather about understanding that everything is a trade-off. Everything has opportunity costs. If you tell yourself that you don't want to make a commitment to a particular relationship because there's some way in which you could imagine another relationship being better, then the opportunity cost you pay is you're not going to enjoy the benefits of a deep and committed relationship. That might be right for a person, there's nothing wrong with it, but it has a cost. So I think settling is not really about settling for less. It's about seeing that we are always making choices that have upsides and downsides.
So anytime we're choosing to do something, we're also choosing not to do something, which can feel kind of overwhelming when we have so much we want or need to get done. And in your book, you talk about neglecting the right things. So how do we decide what to prioritize and then what to neglect?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I don't think it has a sort of firm and final answer, because I think that actually that's another way that we're limited, right? You can't ever know that a choice you make was the optimal choice. I think that on a sort of day-to-day level of your tasks and your to-do lists and things like that, any approach that really, the technical term, I guess, is limiting your work in progress, right? Any approach to organizing your tasks that causes you to say, okay, these are the 5 or these are the 10 for now. I'm going to make all the other ones wait outside the door, even though they're important and, people may be getting impatient, and just take that sort of one thing at a time, or maybe 5 things at a time, but not 300 things at a time, finishing things, not necessarily big projects because they can take months, but defining something that you can finish and then finishing that and moving it off and then picking up something else. I think that is a really powerful, basic practice here, and accepting that it's going to come with anxiety about the things you're not doing, right? It's not a way to get to being on top of everything.
You also talked about the Warren Buffett, the list making, when you think about broader priorities. Yeah. And I know we aren't. I don't think we're sure exactly if he said this, but let's just say he said it.
Right.
And the practice is making a list of the top, 25 things that are most important to you that you get done or accomplish in your life, and then crossing off the 20 at the bottom that aren't the highest priorities. So you make the list and then you order it in priority and you cross everything else off. And you don't say, I'll get to that later. You actually just say, that's done.
Yeah. Ranked order, 25 biggest priorities in life. Top 5, focus on them. The bottom 20, avoid them like the plague, because they are the ones that are important enough to exert that seductive pull, but you've already said they're not the ones that are most important. So you actually sort of have to oblige yourself to resist them. Where that takes concrete form, for example, is it's sort of these kind of middle range priorities. That's the danger zone.
Those are the ones we have to get rid of, yeah.
Or, and again, it's all to do with being friendly to yourself, but to just be aware and to move gradually in the direction of spending your time on things that you can truly say you care about spending your time. Yeah.
Well, so then that takes me to the idea of, you talk about good and bad procrastination, right? And this sounds so obvious, but I do think that people struggle with this. It's the idea of imperfect action. How do we just take a next step when we're sort of in that place of going, the more we think about something, the worse it becomes, right?
Yeah.
The bigger the monster gets.
No, it feels awful. And in some sense, the new book is just all about that step, right?
Yeah.
The imperfect action step. And I think that that kind of procrastination, it stems from this very deep-seated notion that in some sense, what you put out there has to be perfect. It's not always that people think that like their creative work has to be literally perfect in that sense. Sometimes it can be that people have to respond in a certain way, or that they have to do it in a certain time, or there's a very powerful one in some corners of business, I think, that you have to be able to do it like with a really unruffled and happy demeanor the whole time, right? And all of these are different forms of like the fantasy of how things are going to go. And pretty much by definition, putting things into actual reality can never measure up to that, because we have minds that can conceive of absolutely perfect works of art, absolutely perfect mood the whole time we're doing it, and happy feelings all the time we're doing it. Minds that can conceive of every single person on the planet like exploding in joy at what we've done. But then at the same time, these minds are contained in these like material bodies and material reality where there's only so much time, and you only have so much talent, and only so much financial resources, and there's a sort of imperfectionism to what you do. What I think is really powerful here is seeing and really grasping and appreciating how baked in that is, right? If you think that the reason your work is imperfect is because you're a bit rubbish, that's a terrible recipe for self-esteem and motivation. But if you understand that like this is literally what it means to be human on some level, sure, you can do better work than someone else and better work than you did at another time or something. But the fact that your perfect fantasy is unattainable for all humans by definition structurally, again, it's this kind of move where, oh, something that felt like a very difficult challenge is actually completely impossible. So you can relax with that, and you can focus instead on putting things out into the world, and gradually through doing that, like reaffirm your understanding that the inevitability of imperfect work is not the same as saying the inevitability of just like terrible work. It can be really good and make a big difference in the world. It just can't, by definition, measure up to perfect fantasies.
Well, it sort of makes me think of writing a book. You know, it's like you just finished Meditations for Mortals. I'm sure you didn't just sit down, write the book, and then your editor and everyone else said, this is perfect exactly as it is, and now you're done, right?
No,
but that's what everyone
not.
else sees, right, is the
Right,
end product. Right. And so then there's an assumption that the middle almost didn't happen.
Right. And in that specific case, just to be probably too candid about it, I mean, I had been totally gratified but surprised by how widely 4,000 Weeks resonated. And so I went through, I think, what is a completely predictable thing with writers where you're sort of frozen, right? It's like, how do I do this next thing? Because there's more people watching than before. And it's the great misery of all of us who think about these things. I'm sure from what you've said, I suppose it's true of you too, that like it's really easy to take an attainment or an accomplishment and turn it immediately into like a bad thing, because it's like, now you've got to meet.
New bar.
Right, exactly,
Yep.
exactly. And so actually in the early stages of writing this new book, I had to deal with that quite radically by sort of embracing forms of like free writing exercises and things that I had previously been very snobby and sniffy about, that literally really is just like, I'm going to put anything down on the page. And I'm going to see that the point is not hoping that what I put down on the page is great. The point is the emotional thing that is going on here, where I let myself feel that horror at what I'm putting on the page and let it pass away and keep going. And then most of the time, for a good chunk of time, I crumpled that up and it was nothing. And then I was gradually building this muscle of being able to just like write what felt true.
So talk to me about Meditations for Mortals. Is this a complement to 4,000 Weeks, or what's the kind of purpose of this second book and how we think about it?
I mean, it's completely freestanding. For me, it grew out of the last book, as I think was sort of inevitable. It was clear to me that where this idea of limitation needed to go next, I suppose, is into sort of this real question of action, putting one foot in front of the other, actually doing the thing. I use the word actually quite a lot, both in the book and in this conversation. And there are people who say you should never use that word. Advice for writers, never use the word actually. But I'm really trying to get this sense of like, no, not a system for taking action that you might put into practice in 6 months' time, but like actually.
Now,
Right.
Yeah.
So, and so one of the things I'm doing in most of the chapters of Meditations for Mortals is taking some aspect of how it is for us to be finite humans in time, trying to do things that matter with massive distractions, and to sort of look at ways in which we go wrong because we're not willing to sort of gently face up to the reality, and then to explore what we might do instead. And then I guess the other thing that sets it apart in a way is I felt I really needed to write something that addressed the extraordinarily distracting and anxiety-inducing general times in which we live. Really, it's more just about doing anything, like getting anything done in any field of life when there is this sort of ambient sense of history unfolding everywhere.
Literally,
and,
yeah.
Right. And I think one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was this notion that another aspect of our being limited is that if you're ever going to do significant things or just enjoy yourself, right? This is almost an illicit thought that in scary times there might be a space in the midst of it all for fun and relaxation and enjoyment. But the point is it has to be now, because in the same way that the time is never coming when you're on top of everything, I don't think there's any reason to believe the time is ever coming when, like, our world is all calm and peaceful and everything's great and everyone agrees with each other and, you know, America isn't polarized. Maybe. Here's hoping.
Can't wait to see the day.
But politics never ends, right? It all just goes on forever. Even if you get the right result at an election, then there's the next election to think about. So I think that we sort of, it's not that we have to ignore that. And for some people, their sort of particular contribution in life is to be very focused on that stuff. But for all of us, we also need to see that, like, you can't postpone being in life and building a meaningful life until we're not in volatile times. So that's another theme.
You know, it's as I'm thinking about the two books, it's like some of the underpinnings is like the self-trust, and it's just trusting in life as it unfolds, and in a way that we, I think, don't. And so a lot of these things are like, they're ways of over-controlling because we don't know how to trust ourselves when it comes to our time, or how to trust ourselves when it comes to the decisions we make, or, you know, any of these things.
No, totally. And of course, this is like, I'm writing the advice I need to hear, as always.
We all do, right?
I use this analogy. You just made me realize I use this analogy, I guess, in Meditations for Mortals, of like, you know, to be human in a finite life is like being in a little kayak on a rapidly flowing river. All you can do is sort of be there and like react to what happens and trust yourself and have a certain amount of awareness of what's going on. But what we sort of really want is to be like the captain of like one of those super yachts where you just program the route in and you're there on a bridge sitting in a plush swivel stool, you know, looking at the computers and not really doing anything, just letting the journey unfold and thinking about how great it's going to be at your destination. But we're never in the super yacht. We're always in the kayak. And we are there anyway, whether we trust that situation or not. So it can only help to sort of face it and find ways to relax into it.
Okay, so a recap on Oliver's last big point about how to prioritize what matters most. Dump your middling priorities. Those are the items on your bucket list that will be seductive enough to grab your attention, but are not important enough to focus on. We'll be right back with Oliver Burkeman on how to take some of his ideas and apply them to our email inboxes, what to focus on in our daily projects to give us more energy, and how the 3 to 4 hour rule has helped some of the most successful people in the world get creative work done. And we're back with Oliver Burkeman. So you talk about email kind of in the sense that, like, the better you are at it almost, the more you will then have and the more time it will take up.
Yeah.
At the same time, we can't ignore all of our emails. And even you were mentioning, it's like you're getting a lot of them and they're even good.
Yeah.
But, you know, they are going to kind of, I don't want to say steal, but they will turn your attention to them for a while. And so how do you think about the way in which, you know, in the working world, it's expected that if an email's sent, you respond? How do we balance that?
I think the best way that I have found is that you sort of take a quantity first approach to the time that you give to email. So it's very much about saying, I will spend, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours, maybe some people it has to be more than that in the day, focused on email, as opposed to I will get through everything by the end of today, because that's just doesn't happen. it's like, it feels to me more like gardening, right? It's like you're sort of like, okay, I'm going to be nurturing, weeding this plot, whatever the right analogy would be. And that's not going to mean responding to every single email immediately. It might mean accepting the cost of some slow or non-responses in the terms of people's impatience or negative responses. And look, if there are people listening to this or watching who say like, well, but I will just get fired if I don't respond to every email I get every day, then okay, your job is responding to email, and you may choose to embrace that, or you may choose to look for alternative work. And secondly, if you're being asked to do an impossible number of emails in a day, like if meeting your job requirements is not possible, then it's not possible. And something's got to give. And it can only be good to sort of feel into that fact and then decide how you're going to respond to it. So some people have occasionally said on the stuff I write and say about email that like, it's easy for you to say.
Right.
And I just say like, yeah, there are some things on the Venn diagram that are easy for me to say and true.
Right.
And the fact that you can't answer an infinite amount of emails in a working day is one of them. So I think it's really important to sort of see where impossible demands are being made. Most of the time, I think what you actually see is that there are ways that you can adjust the expectations of people you work for by letting them know about what you're doing when you're not replying to emails and making them understand that you're meeting goals that they're happy for you to be meeting if you maybe only check in once or twice a day. So there's lots of different ways to negotiate that. It's going to be much easier for some people than other people based on their situation. But that basic issue of finite capacity is always going to be there.
In the context of work, I've seen a lot of leadership teams where it's like you get into a meeting room and you have to make a decision. It's almost implied that a decision must be made about something.
Yeah.
And no one has been brave enough to say or has chosen to say, can we just have a minute to think about it? I need to sleep on that. It's not a common phrase that I hear or that I've heard. And it's almost similar with email, right? It's like sometimes when you're not responding, you're thinking.
Yeah. No.
And we don't create space for that.
No, totally. And there is always that big challenge of like, even if all this is true, how do you let it permeate a whole corporate culture? But I think that whenever you can be a sort of ambassador, evangelist for these kinds of ideas.
Martyr.
It bears results, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily lead to the email being answered as quickly as it could conceivably have been answered, but it does lead to the project being completed more quickly and at a higher level of quality.
So tell me about this idea of the 3 or 4 hour rule, which, by the way, other people in history have used this. This isn't a brand new one, but it's one that you say is effective.
It's just extraordinary if you go through the sort of historical records of the daily routines of all sorts of artists, authors, scientists, other scholars, how frequently people who have the freedom to do it will choose to focus for about 3 or 4 hours in the day on their sort of core creative work, and then not try to do it for any more than that. They sort of naturally end up at this amount, as if there's something quite sort of baked in to how human attention and creativity works, that it should be that kind of amount. So what I recommend in the book, I call the 3 to 4 hour rule for getting creative work done. Again, if you can, if your professional situation allows it, it's a really good idea to try to ring fence 3 or 4 hours. Probably it's going to be best if it's in the morning, to focus on the core work that you do that needs the most thought and reflection. But also, and it's a really important other part of it, to then not worry too much, right? To then be okay with the fact that life and office life and work life is full of interruptions and unplanned things. It's like you can sort of be as strict as you can with one part in order to be as free and flexible as you can with the rest.
Got it. So if I'm focusing for 3 or 4 hours in the first part of the day, then maybe the influx of emails are okay.
Right. Or a welcome change.
Right. Correct,
yeah,
right.
Exactly. So, and I think that if you do the opposite, which is try to really rigorously box out every single hour of the day, there's going to just be so many times when that collides with reality in a stressful fashion.
Yeah, I love that, because then you don't end up having to give the whole thing the boot. You can just say, no, from 8 to 11.
Right. And you could easily imagine how enlightened leaders in organizations could help that be the case, right? Could help it be the case that people had those hours without meaning that there couldn't be lots of all the other stuff that has to happen, right, in their work. Yeah.
Another thing you talk about too is multitasking. You're not a fan.
No, I feel like this is
It's
embedded
fair,
wisdom
yes.
now, right? This idea that you shouldn't multitask. If this is the first time that someone's hearing that they shouldn't multitask, then I'm impressed. But the lure of multitasking is it doesn't expose you to this uncomfortable feeling of, yeah, those projects are important and people are waiting on them, but I'm still only going to focus on this one for now because I've got limited resources. Instead, like, you can just bounce between all of them and feel like you're sort of taking care of business and everything's
You're
going
on
okay.
it, yeah.
Exactly. But not only are you not on it because you're dividing your attention so inefficiently, but you're sort of less on it than if you focus one at a time, because every time you come to a difficult bit of a project, you just go and deal with another one instead. So all your projects kind of stall out at the difficult
Part started.
At the difficult
Yeah.
point, right? Yeah, exactly,
Right.
exactly. And I'm not saying, like, some people may be listening and watching and saying, like, well, like, projects are too big to just do one of and leave all the others to wait. It's not like, I don't say, like, I'm going to write a book and not speak to another human until the book's written, and then it's not that. You have to break things down into sort of manageable chunks, things you could do in an hour or two or in a day or something. But once you've done that, there's so much benefit in just being with one of them and allowing the others to wait until it's time to move to the next one.
And is this idea of like breaking it down, is that connected to how you sort of reframe finishing things?
Yeah, you would think that pushing yourself to complete projects would be exhausting. And actually it has this effect of unleashing energy to go on to the next thing. There's something incredibly satisfying about being able to say, like, I did that thing. But yes, if you only apply that to things like renovate my home or write and publish a book or whatever, those are just so big that you're not going to get that benefit. I think it has to do with the fact that we are finite. We do live in temporal succession. Life is one thing after another, whether we're kidding ourselves that it isn't or not. We are actually doing one thing after another and not multitasking all the time. So I think when you fall in with that by defining finishing points and then carrying them out, it's like you're sort of being carried forward on the current of reality. So that I think it's really, I use and also strongly mock, I suppose, this word deliverables, right? It's like define a deliverable. It's sort of business speak, but whatever. Come up with some sort of end point. So if I'm writing a book, it could be like come up with the structure of chapter 1, preferably in a physical form on 2 sides of paper. That's a thing that I can finish. And I get that boost from the finishing, even though actually it's one piece of a huge project.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to think about. I mean, the feeling of relief when you finish something, but I think to be more effective is thinking about the feeling when you don't finish something.
Right.
God, it's the
right.
worst,
Right.
right? It's like it hangs over your head forever. It's sometimes like a vote against yourself, right?
Right.
Like in some ways, especially
Yeah.
if it's something that you care about, you're like,
yeah.
ooh, I don't like that I just voted against myself. And how do I dig out of that hole?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. The godfather of modern productivity writing, David Allen, who wrote the book Getting Things Done decades ago now, pointed out very wisely that even just characterizing what there is left to do and putting it on a list has a small amount of that power to it, right? Just like capturing and seeing it is its own form of finishing. But anything that sort of takes us from living in this hazy world of, trying to keep track of everything, yelling at ourselves for not having done enough of the things and all this stuff, that turns it into little pieces that you're then going to address yourself to and learn to allow the other little pieces to wait, I think is really powerful.
And one of the stories you talk about in Meditation for Mortals, and I'm curious if this is your favorite or if there are others, but is the story of Jerry Seinfeld. People were obsessed with this kind of like productivity hack he had around the fact that he wanted to be a better joke writer. So he wrote jokes every day. And then he would cross it off as an X on the calendar. And you just automatically don't want to give up on yourself by not getting the next X on the calendar.
Right.
So he just kept writing. But he was surprised that people thought this was some brilliant idea.
Yeah, no, I interviewed him for the Guardian, and I was not primarily meant to be interviewing him about productivity techniques, but I obviously couldn't resist. And he just was like, why is that a productivity technique? He found it completely bizarre that it had spread as far and wide as it had, because he's like, do people think that if you want to be a good runner, you can just sit around all day? It's like, of course you have to do things most days. You have to keep coming back and doing some more. What I don't think you have to do is sort of self-punishingly demand of yourself that you do it absolutely every single day, and that if you miss a day, well, then, call the whole
Forget
thing
it
off.
all.
Like, right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I mentioned in that section of the book, this alternative that I'm borrowing from Dan Harris, the meditation teacher and podcaster, that you can do things daily-ish instead, right? You can aspire to have a lot of X's on that calendar over the course of a year. And daily-ish matters. Daily-ish is not just do it whenever you feel like it. There's real pressure there, but it's not perfectionistic pressure.
Yeah.
It's not the moment my kid is homesick from school and I can't do this thing, then my whole self-improvement scheme is like in the trash. No, it's just like 4 days a week is probably daily-ish. 6 days is definitely daily-ish. Maybe occasionally in some really unusual times in your life, you're going to accept 3. I don't know. But, you got to keep doing it.
Well, and I loved that term because it does relieve you of the pressure of performance.
Right.
And performance when it comes to anything, at work, am I doing things perfectly every time I do them?
Right.
Or am I daily-ish getting most things pretty right?
Right.
And obviously it depends on what work you do that you want to have.
Right.
You want to be able to do things really well. And
Yeah.
sometimes you really do have to be on it.
Yeah.
But most of the time there's some slack that we don't give ourselves. And that's something else as I think about your 2 books is like, again, the idea of, trusting ourselves, but also of releasing the pressure I think so many of us have around performance and perfection, and deciding instead to sort of meet ourselves again in a more realistic middle ground that could feel for a perfectionist like settling, but is actually just saying, oh, this is not possible. So how can I do this in a way that relieves me of my lack of self-compassion?
Right, exactly. And yeah, it is a kinder way to be, but it is also a more productive way to be for almost everybody over the long haul. Because what happens if you do demand absolute perfection, absolute consistency, and all the rest from yourself, if you're the kind of person who's going to do that in the first place, is you just get deeper and deeper into this kind of psychological tangle of I'm not good enough, so I'm not going to do it, or I'm sick of these people who keep shouting at me to do this thing, so I'm not going to do anything, even though the voices are coming from me,
Yeah.
So, just treating all of this as a huge war that you've got to fight is not a long-term recipe for the intrinsic motivation to come back and do it day after day, and to do it in the kind of lively spirit that's going to make a difference to other people as well.
Yeah. What changes about us on an individual level if and when we accept the arguments you're making about time, and then the recommendations you're making about how we use it, and what changes at a societal level?
That's a really interesting distinction. I think what changes at an individual level, your nervous system calms down. You don't feel like you're constantly living for a future moment of fulfillment, but you're actually at least somewhat absorbed in your life. You can breathe out, your shoulders can drop a bit, and at the same time, and because of that, you can do the things that matter to you most, and you can actually, to a much greater extent, fill your days with the things that bring you alive. I have to believe that in this fantasy world you're sketching, where everyone follows my
Could be a reality,
advice to the letter, that this is societally a very positive thing. I think that, in all sorts of different ways, from the biggest scale to the smallest, our attempt to sort of outrun our limitations and convince ourselves that everything good is going to come at some later point when we've done that is the cause of all the problems, right? I think it's the cause of something as huge as decimation of natural resources on the planet, right? That idea of, not having to think about the limitations of the physical environment. In politics, I think it's sometimes the sense that, like, with enough fighting, we could change all the people on the other side to think how we think, and then peace and plenty would be everywhere. And just on a much sort of like local community level, I think a lot of people's sort of hostilities and not relating well to each other or being rude to each other in public, or whatever it is, a lot of them come from this kind of like, leave me alone, I've got to try to get to this point where I'm finally on top of everything. And that there's actually a real sort of sense of, I don't know, solidarity or communality or something in recognizing that actually there are big discrepancies and socioeconomic injustices, but on this level of the fact of our being limited, we are 100% all in the same boat.
Oof. I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements for me.
Oh, okay.
Better humans are?
More in touch with their built-in limitations.
Better work is?
Something that makes you feel more alive.
And finally, then, a better world has?
Wow. I think more liveliness in it, more friendliness in it, and more self-friendliness as well.
I love that. Thank you so much for this. It was wonderful. I feel like I could probably intellectualize with you all day, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
That was Oliver Burkeman, author of 4,000 Weeks and Meditations for Mortals. If you liked this episode, I think you're also going to like a recent one in which I share an exercise for crafting your time and your calendar around what fulfills you most. You can find a link in the show notes, and if you give it a listen, let me know what you think. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Emily Reeves and Ava Ahmadbegi. Asaf Kadron is our sound engineer. Tim Boland mixed our show. We get additional support from Alex Kuznetsova and Mujib Merdad. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Maya Pope-Chappelle is director of content and audience development. Courtney Koop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is LinkedIn's editor-in-chief and vice president of content development. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.